Commissioner Gordon, Bane has escaped.
The men you're trying to beat are already losing. They just don't know the war started, and neither did you until right now. Your generation is being quietly slaughtered by their own habits in real time, and the bodies are stacking up in apartments, in jobs they hate, in marriages going cold, in mirrors they no longer look in. You don't have to be a monster to outperform them. You just have to be awake while they sleep through their own lives. The man across from you on the train is not your competition because he has more. He's your competition because he wants what you want and is also doing nothing about it. And one of you is going to break the tie. The world has more men in it than ever, and fewer real ones than at any point in modern history, which means the door has never been wider open for the man willing to walk through it with intent in his eyes. Look at your closest 5 friends and tell yourself the truth about each of them, because they are the ranking system you actually live inside, not some abstract ladder. One of them is drinking himself slowly into a smaller life. One is in a relationship that's draining him, and he won't leave because leaving requires a confrontation with himself. One has been about to start the same project for 3 years. One is medicating with weed every night and calling it relaxation. One is fine, decent, normal, going nowhere in particular, content to drift. These are the men you've been measuring yourself against, and the reason you feel okay about your own life is that you've been grading on a curve set by men who quietly gave up. Outperforming them is not impressive, it's the floor. The actual question is whether you're willing to leave that group behind once you realize you've been hiding inside their averageness. 3 years from now, if nothing changes, same job, same routines, same bedtime, same friends, same scroll habits, same excuses, same Sunday dread, there is a version of you waiting at the end of that hallway, and he is not a worst-case scenario, he's the default outcome. He's heavier, he's more tired, he's more bitter. He's quieter at dinners because he has nothing new to say. He started watching younger men pass him and pretending not to notice. He's developed a specific laugh he uses to deflect questions about his life. He is being built right now in real time by every Tuesday you waste, and he will be standing in your bathroom mirror in 2028, whether you accept him or not. Outperforming everyone starts with refusing to become him, and the only way to refuse is to actively betray the man you currently are. Born in the dark, molded by it, that's the kind of man you have to become to leave your peers behind. The men competing with you for the life you want grew up soft, stayed soft, and have built every habit around staying comfortable, which means the only weapon you actually need is a willingness to be uncomfortable on purpose daily, when no one is watching. They cannot match that. They've spent 15 years training their nervous systems to flinch from anything hard, and you can spend the next 3 training yours to walk toward it. The asymmetry is brutal. A man who has practiced discomfort beats a man who has practiced avoidance every single time, in every domain, without exception. You don't need to be born exceptional. You need to choose to be molded by something they ran from. Sleep is the first front in the war, and it's where most of your peers have already surrendered without realizing it. They stay up until 1 a.m., scrolling through other men's lives, wake up exhausted, drag themselves through their day on caffeine, perform poorly at everything they do, and blame the world for the fog they manufactured at midnight. A man who sleeps 8 hours in a dark room off his phone wakes up with a chemical advantage over every sleep-deprived peer he'll encounter that day, and that advantage stacks every single morning for the rest of his life. Your boys are walking around in a low, grade hangover from blue light and broken sleep, calling it just being tired, and you can outperform them without doing anything special, just by being rested in a generation that refuses to rest. This isn't a wellness tip. It's a knife you can quietly carry while everyone else fights with their bare hands. Money is being moved out of your generation's hands by men who decided early to stop being financially illiterate, and your peers are funding their lifestyles through small, daily, invisible bleeds they can't even name. The DoorDash habit, the car payment on a vehicle they can't afford, the rent in a city they live in for the aesthetic, the subscriptions they forgot they have, the credit card balance they pay the minimum on. None of it feels dramatic in the moment, and that's exactly the design. A man can lose every chance he had at building wealth without ever making a single big mistake, just by leaking $10 a day for 15 years until his options are gone. Outperforming them financially doesn't require getting rich. It requires not bleeding, which most of your peers cannot stop doing because their identities are built around the bleed. Stop the bleed, and you'll be ahead of 90% of men your age within 5 years without earning a single extra dollar. Your body is a daily referendum on how seriously you take yourself, and the men around you are losing that vote in slow motion. Photos of men in their 30s from 40 years ago show something that almost doesn't exist anymore. Lean, hard, present in their own skin. And the decline since then isn't genetic, it's behavioral, and it's happening to your friends right now while they joke about dad bods and call it self-acceptance. A man who trains hard 4 times a week, eats real food, and stays under 15% body fat into his 30s walks into rooms with an authority that no amount of money or charisma can replicate, because his body itself is a public record of his discipline. Your peers will spend the next decade getting softer, slower, and less present in their own lives, and you can outperform them physically by doing what humans were always supposed to do: move heavy things, eat what came out of the ground, sleep in the dark, while they keep choosing the path that made them tired in the first place. Loneliness is going to hit your peers like a freight train somewhere between 32 and 36, and they have no plan for it because they don't even know it's coming. The boys they used to see weekly will get married, have kids, move out of the city, stop responding to the group chat, and the casual social fabric that's been keeping them functional their entire adult life will dissolve in the span of about 18 months. The men who built nothing during their 20s, no real brotherhood, no chosen family, no men they'd take a bullet for and who'd take one for them, will find themselves in their mid-30s scrolling alone in apartments at 11 p.m., wondering when their life got so quiet. Investing now in 2 or 3 real men, the kind who will tell you the truth and show up when your father dies, is the rarest and most undervalued advantage of your decade, and your peers are squandering it by mistaking acquaintances for friendships. Build the brotherhood now, while it's still possible to forge, because it cannot be assembled from scratch in your 40s. Performance dips before it rises in every domain that matters: language, lifting, writing, business, social skill, instruments. Fighting, because the brain has to dismantle the old, comfortable wiring before it can lay down anything better, and the dismantling phase feels like getting worse. The men who go on to outperform everyone are not the ones with talent. They're the ones who recognized the dip for what it is, sat inside it without panicking, and let the new pattern install itself. The men who quit at the bottom of the dip walk away convinced they weren't built for it, when in reality they were 3 weeks from the curve bending upward and chose to file the experience under "not my thing." Your entire life is full of those buried receipts. And almost every, "I'm just not good at that," you carry was actually a dip you exited too early. A man's resume of abandonments tells you more about him than his resume of accomplishments ever will. Each thing you started and quit during the painful middle is sitting in your psyche as quiet evidence that you cannot tolerate the feeling of being temporarily bad at something, which means every time a new opportunity appears, your nervous system already knows the script. You'll start, you'll hit the dip, you'll find an articulate reason to leave, and you'll add another item to the pile. The pile is building a man, whether you like it or not, and that man is being trained to flee from the exact zone where all real transformation happens. Outperforming everyone requires you to break this pattern in one specific domain, suffer through one full curve from start to mastery, and prove to your own body that the dip ends. Until you've done it once, you cannot be trusted to do it again. Once you've done it once, you can do it for the rest of your life. The dip has a specific texture, and learning to recognize it is the difference between men who become something and men who stay where they are. There's a particular flavor of frustration that hits around week 3 or week 8 or month 4, depending on the skill. A heavy, sour feeling that whispers this isn't working, you're wasting your time, you don't have what it takes, and it sounds exactly like wisdom. The voice is convincing because it's using your own intelligence against you, building a case for surrender that feels rational, measured, and adult. Anyone who has ever built anything real has heard this voice at the bottom of every J curve and chosen not to obey it, not because they were stronger, but because they had been through the dip before and recognized the trick. You're being tricked right now by something you've quit before, and you don't recognize the voice because it's wearing a different costume this time. Every domain has a graveyard at the bottom of its J curve, and the bones in that graveyard belong to men who were 3 to 6 months away from breaking through. The gym graveyard is full of men who quit at week 10, right before their bodies were about to compose into something. The writing graveyard is full of men who deleted their drafts at chapter 3, weeks before the prose was going to start clicking. The business graveyard is full of men who shut it down at month 9, often a single quarter before the curve would have inflected. None of these men knew they were close, because the dip doesn't tell you how close you are. It just tells you how bad you currently feel, and conflates that feeling with your future. A man who can sit inside a dip without consulting his feelings about it has already separated himself from the entire population that will keep filling those graveyards. Old patterns do not die quietly when you start trying to overwrite them. They fight back, sabotage the new wiring, and produce the discomfort that gets misread as failure. The body is conservative. It spent years learning the inefficient way to do something and built efficiency around that inefficiency. And now you're asking it to dismantle what it perfected so it can start over from scratch in a worse state. Of course it resists. Of course it makes the early reps feel impossible. Of course your form gets worse before it gets better. Your output gets uglier before it gets cleaner. Your confidence gets shakier before it stabilizes. Recognizing this is not motivational, it's mechanical. The dip is not a sign of weakness. It's the literal sound of an old habit being uninstalled, and the men who can listen to that sound without flinching are the ones who get to run new software for the rest of their lives. A particularly cruel feature of the J curve is that the deepest part of the dip often arrives just after a flash of unexpected progress, which makes the regression feel personal. The first week you start running, you feel powerful. Week 3, your knees hurt, your times are slower, Your energy is lower, and you're convinced you broke something. The first month at the new craft, you produce one decent piece by accident. The next 8 weeks produce nothing but garbage, and the contrast convinces you that the early piece was a fluke. This pattern is universal across every skill and is the single biggest reason men abandon things they were actually built for. They mistake regression to the mean during the rewiring phase as evidence that the early flash was the ceiling. The flash wasn't the ceiling, it was a preview. The dip is the construction crew. A man's tolerance for the dip is the closest thing to a real predictor of his future, and it has almost nothing to do with talent and everything to do with how much shame he can hold while temporarily incompetent. The shame of being bad at something in front of yourself is a load most men cannot carry past 3 weeks. Their ego cannot tolerate the version of themselves that fumbles, drops the rep, writes the bad sentence, plays the wrong note, says the wrong thing in the meeting, posts the cringe video. They quit not because the skill is too hard, but because the temporary identity of beginner who looks foolish is unbearable to a fragile self. The men who outperform everyone simply built a higher ceiling for that specific shame early in life, and now they can stay in the dip indefinitely without their self-image collapsing, which is the entire game. The dip lies to you about its length, and that lie is what kills most attempts. When you're inside it, 3 weeks feels like 3 months, and 3 months feels like the rest of your life. The brain compresses pleasure and stretches pain. Sweet experiences shrink in memory, painful ones expand, which means inside the dip, time itself becomes part of the resistance. Men come out of failed attempts saying things like, "I gave it a year and nothing happened," when forensically reconstructing their actual effort reveals 6 weeks of inconsistent work spread across that year. The dip wasn't endured, it was sampled. Real time inside the curve, the kind that produces real adaptation, is shorter than the dip's marketing department wants you to believe. But you have to actually be in it daily for the timeline to count. The work is not what's stopping you. The unbearable boredom of the work is. Hard you can romanticize. Boring offers no story to tell anyone, no photograph to take, no dramatic arc to share at dinner. It's just you alone, doing the same unglamorous thing for the 400th time, while the world rewards louder, dumber pursuits with attention you secretly want. The version of you that's been failing for years isn't weak. He's vain in a quiet way nobody talks about, addicted to the feeling of being impressive on a short timeline, allergic to the long, flat stretches where nothing photogenic happens and nobody sees the reps. Outperforming everyone requires the ability to be a man whose entire week looks like nothing from the outside and contains everything on the inside. And your peers cannot do this because they've trained themselves to need an audience for their effort to feel real to them. Loneliness is the actual cost of the path you say you want, and almost no one warns you about how loud the silence gets at month 7. When the friends who cheered the launch have moved on, the early supporters have stopped checking in, and the work has settled into a routine that nobody finds interesting except the man doing it. The novelty audience leaves first. The encouragement audience leaves second. The curiosity audience leaves third. Eventually, the only person left in the room with the work is you and the work. And the relationship between those two becomes the entire engine of your future. Men who cannot tolerate being uninteresting to other people for extended periods will quit here, find a new shiny thing, restart the cycle of early excitement, and call it growth. The men who outperform everyone made peace with being temporarily forgettable, knowing the forgetting period is exactly when the actual building happens in private, with no witnesses. Slowness eats the modern man alive because his entire nervous system has been rewired to expect feedback within seconds, not seasons. A generation raised on instant likes, instant matches, instant rankings, instant rebuttals cannot psychologically tolerate a project that gives no feedback for months, then gives partial feedback, then gives delayed and ambiguous feedback for years before paying off. The pace of mastery has not changed. The men attempting it have. Your great-grandfather could spend 20 years apprenticing in a craft and feel he was on schedule. You feel behind if a Tuesday afternoon doesn't produce visible progress, and the gap between those two relationships with time is the entire reason your generation cannot build what previous ones did. Real things grow at biological speed, not algorithmic speed, and any man who insists on algorithmic feedback from a biological process will quit before the first harvest. Your need to feel impressive is the single biggest tax on your potential, and you don't even register it as a feeling. It operates as a background filter on every decision you make. You don't pick the project that would teach you the most. You pick the one that would look the best to talk about. You don't pick the gym that would actually train you. You pick the one with the aesthetic. You don't pick the friend group that would sharpen you. You pick the one that would flatter you. The filter is invisible because it's been running since you were 13, and dismantling it requires noticing it in real time and deliberately choosing the option that makes you look smaller while making you become bigger. Until you can do that, every choice you make will be subtly bent toward the version of you that prioritizes being seen as winning over actually winning, and the two are almost never the same path. Watching other men post wins while you're deep in the unglamorous middle is one of the most psychologically dangerous experiences your decade will offer. And the men who survive it are the ones who learn to mute their feeds during their hardest years. The comparison is rigged. You're seeing their highlight reels against your raw footage, their final outputs against your messy process, their year 3 results against your month 3 confusion. And your brain cannot make this comparison without producing a low, constant burn of inadequacy that bleeds into every part of your life. Some men respond by quitting the work to focus on improving their own optics. Some respond by splitting their attention between the work and their performance of the work. The men who outperform everyone respond by going dark, severing the comparison feed entirely, and trusting that their work will eventually generate its own evidence without needing constant external validation to keep them upright. A specific kind of identity collapse happens around month 8 of any serious pursuit, where the early version of yourself who was excited to start dies, and the version who has built enough callus to keep going hasn't fully emerged yet, leaving you in a strange middle space where you don't recognize yourself, don't enjoy the work, and don't have any of the rewards that would justify staying. This middle space is where almost everyone leaves because it feels like depression, and it looks like depression, and it shares some of the symptoms of depression. But it's actually a transformation crisis, the larval state of becoming a man who has finished something hard. Men who quit here go on to call themselves not the type who finishes things. Men who stay go on to discover that the discomfort of that middle space is the only door to the version of themselves they've been chasing. The middle is not a sign you're failing. It's the sign that you're far enough in for the rebuild to actually be happening. The flatness of the work is the disguise the work wears to filter out unserious men. If the work were exciting, everyone would do it. If the rewards were immediate, everyone would chase them. Half of your life isn't happening to you. It's happening near you, while your mind is somewhere else, And the Harvard data simply put a number on what every man already feels but refuses to confront. 47% of waking life is spent in a low-grade fugue state where the body is in one room and the mind is in another, neither producing anything nor enjoying anything, simply burning hours that will never be reissued. The men who outperform everyone aren't smarter or more disciplined in any mystical sense. They just happen to be physically present for more of their own existence, which doubles, triples, quadruples the actual life they live compared to peers running on autopilot.